Hey, Colin Wright, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Colin, we've been talking a bit. I understand that there's a new kind of push right now, a lot of scientific papers talking about the elimination of gender altogether. And this seems bizarre to me because I was under the impression they were trying to create like hundreds of genders. Last I checked, it was like 72, but I hear it's more now. Which is it? What are they doing?
So it's a little bit of both. There's sort of two different concepts that we should maybe bracket here. There's the concept of biological sex, which, from my background as an evolutionary biologist, has to do with whether you're male and female, and this is fundamentally rooted in the type of gamete, sperm, or egg that your reproductive system is sort of organized around to produce. On the other hand, we have this concept of gender or gender identity, which is sort of a sort of social stereotype that you might identify with that's sort of related, linked to being male or female. There's been a big push in the sciences, unfortunately, to recast the biology of sex, so male and female, as sort of this spectrum, or a social construct entirely that anyone can just identify into these different categories, and that there's nothing fundamentally male or female about anyone. We're all sort of intersex to some degree, and that sex is just a collection of various different traits like chromosomes and hormones and whether you have breasts or a beard and things like that. And it's being framed this way because they need this idea of being able to modify your sex through modifying of your secondary sex traits like your breasts and your facial hair and how you look and how deep your voice is, in order to match this subjective and sort of ideological notion of gender identity, which again is just rooted in the sort of social stereotype that you identify with, degrees of masculinity and femininity. That's the basis for all like the gender affirming care and the sex change surgeries for children going on.
So essentially what they're trying to say is that everybody's trans, basically.
In a way, I mean,
yeah.
If you look at how the Endocrine Society, how the American Psychiatric Society, how all these societies and even the CDC define what being transgender is, they say it's an umbrella term for someone who identifies or behaves according to the stereotypes of the opposite sex, or a sex other than the one that they were, what they would say, assigned at birth. And so under that strict rubric, if you're not just a maximally masculine male or a maximally feminine female, you are by definition non-binary, which is sort of in this trans umbrella. So really, they're sort of transing just the normal people, because very few people are, just perfect paragons of masculinity or femininity. We're all sort of in between somewhere, even if there's differences between males and females.
Well, I think for folks like us, we can look at this, and probably most of our viewers, we can look at this and say, well, that's crazy nonsense. A lot of us just write it off. But the other side of it is that it's not like that. When it comes to schools and education, if kids are being taught, quote unquote science, and this is what science is teaching them, this is what kids are going to be indoctrinated with, believing this is, undeniable scientific fact. I mean, how do you see that system of education? How do you see this affecting education?
It has totally taken over public education. I think our major problem is that we've assumed it was so crazy that it couldn't possibly have taken hold. And so we sort of just pass it off as we might pass off people who are claiming that the earth is flat. This is claiming that there's there's more than two sexes, or that sex as a social construct is as crazy or crazier than the flat earth idea, because even the people back in the day when they thought the earth was flat, they still knew what men and women were. This has infiltrated our schools, our full education system, and it just teaches what I think is a fundamental pseudoscience of biology. And I think if we're denying fundamental aspects of what it means to be male or female, and especially because we're a species that is a sexually reproducing species, you can't deny such fundamental aspects of your biology and expect good outcomes for society. But now we're sort of seeing this left-wing pseudoscience coming in the realm of the biology of sex.
Well, I know you did a recent investigation. There was a mother who actually went through the process of going through the trans process through the hospital to try to help her daughter, who I believe she was a boy, if I remember correctly, showing her how loose and unregulated the system is. Can you tell us a bit about how that whole thing started?
Yeah, so there's a mom, her name is Beth Bourne. She lives in Davis, California. And her daughter started identifying as a boy one day. Whether she got these ideas through social media or in her schools, that's not totally clear. And her daughter wanted to have all those gender affirming, hormones and surgeries, as they call them. Fortunately, she was able to stave that off until her daughter reached 18. But the mom wanted to demonstrate sort of how there are no safeguardings whatsoever in this field of gender affirming care. It's really just, you walk in, you tell them that you identify as something other than your sex, and then they just basically give you this list of things, and you can just check the boxes, and it's all covered under insurance as medically necessary. So what Beth did, she received a letter from, just a routine letter from Kaiser Permanente saying, it's time for your cervical screening. This is for anyone with people with a cervix. It didn't say the word woman. And so she asked about this terminology, and they said it's to be inclusive, for non-binary and gender diverse people. And so she just sort of inquired, sort of playing dumb, like, what does a non-binary mean? And then, this is an idea rooted in stereotypes. And she's like, well, I'm kind of a masculine woman. I like sports and working out. So maybe I'm non-binary. And then it's like, okay, they changed her medical records immediately. Like, well, if I'm actually not a woman, maybe I should get a double mastectomy. Maybe I should get surgery. Immediately, she was able just to do these 15-minute Zoom conversations, get immediately approved for the double mastectomy, getting the testosterone. Then she wanted to take it another step further, saying, if I really do identify as a boy, maybe I can have a phalloplasty, which is where they create a fake non-functional penis, or penis-like looking object out of flesh, either from your forearm or your thigh, and they reconstruct that in your genital area, and which would also come with having her uterus removed, having a hysterectomy, and they approved this too. All under the guise of being medically necessary. There was no mental health evaluation for her, no safeguards, no one asking her why a 53-year-old woman suddenly wants to have all these surgeries, and they're escalating very rapidly. No matter how many red flags she was dropping along the way, they just gave her everything she wanted. So it really demonstrates that this is operating like any other type of medicine that we have. This is, it's all being covered under insurance, but these are just purely cosmetic procedures. And so it makes no sense that these are, life-saving or medically necessary.
I mean, this is shocking too, because if I understand right, that's not the way that normal medical diagnosis works. You can't just self-diagnose under most circumstances. Yeah. How is the standard different with this?
It's completely different. I mean, some people responding to this article that she wrote said, I've been trying to get, I blew out my back and I've had, back surgery, and they're having trouble getting insurance to cover X-rays or CT scans or MRIs for, things like cancer and things like that, because insurance companies generally want to not pay for as many things as they can. But if you simply just say you no longer identify as your sex, all of this is covered. The most extreme and risky surgeries you can imagine, like a phalloplasty. This is not a minor procedure by any means, by any notion. So really, it's rooted in this idea that people should be able to affirm their genders, and it's this idea of having embodiment goals, which is really just plastic surgery on demand for anyone who doesn't happen to identify with their sex.
Well, we're at the beginning stage of this, and one of the things I like to do is I like to look further down the line of where things could be leading. If they start saying that there's no such thing as male and female, I think Matt Walsh raised this in What is a Woman? If there's no such thing as a man or a woman, and if they believe that, then what does it mean if you identify as a man or a woman? If a woman suddenly believes she's a man and they don't think men exist, then what is she transing to?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, where are we going with this? I'm curious.
Yeah, so they would say that they have this ideology, which a lot of people refer to as gender ideology. And at root, what it says fundamentally is that whether you're a boy or a girl or a man or a woman has nothing to do with your biology, but has everything to do with how you identify. And they would say that there are people who have traits that we would consider, very male in their orientation or female, even though they're kind of socially constructed. And they would say that we have social roles and stereotypes that we apply to those two categories of people, these loose categories. And it is those roles and stereotypes that they identify as being male or female. That's what they call the gender binary, is those two binary social roles and stereotypes. They think that is what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman. But then they think biology is just a complete, social construct that's just sort of a statistical reality. You can never be male or female, just varying degrees of maleness and femaleness. And they don't think that matters whatsoever. They would rather just look at the stereotype that you most closely identify with and have that be the central guiding star for all of policy and whether or not individuals gain access to certain prisons or spaces or sports, what have you.
Well, I think the funniest thing with this is that it's all based on stereotype then. That, the idea of a woman identifying as a man is that she enjoys sports and working out. If it's yes. Something so basis, who's to say that women don't enjoy sports or working out? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is such a good point, because you would think that this, the people on the left side of the political spectrum, this is where a lot of, the feminist movements have taken place. And I can't think of anything more sort of anti-feminist or sexist than saying that a woman who exhibits traditionally masculine behaviors and forms of expression is no longer a woman, but is by definition a man. There was a really good meme that I saw that really encapsulated what gender ideology does. And it had three parts to it. The first said, I think it was sexism, and it was the woman must do the dishes. And then it had a next slide and it said equality, and it said men or women can do the dishes. And then the third one said gender ideology, and it said whoever's doing the dishes is the woman. And I think that is just a perfect encapsulation of what gender ideology does and how just upside down this ideology is, and more sexist than any other ideology I can actually imagine.
Well, and this is kind of the funny way where it's butting heads with even feminism and so on. You have a clashing of leftist ideals or leftist ideology. But, one of the big things they're doing as well is they're teaching this to kids. And back to the idea of this woman who, to prove a point to her daughter, who thought she was a boy for a bit, she wanted to show her how loose and unregulated the system was. Back to that point, a lot of times the kids seem to be, they're being indoctrinated to believe this. And so it seems bizarre to me that kids are being taught in schools now, it seems, that there are certain traits that are definitive of men and women, which are so actually funnily rigid, in fact. That, again, we talked about, if a woman likes sports, or if there's a tomboy, then she might actually be trans and should go through like life-altering surgery. The children are being taught this, and if they're being taught it, it seems like there's a process of indoctrination. Can you explain to me that process of indoctrination for children?
A lot of it starts with really just asking them for what their pronouns are. That's sort of a gateway to this ideology, because you can tell who in your classroom, who are the boys and who are the girls, and they'll say, what are your pronouns? And then when you ask questions about what the pronoun exchange rituals do, like, well, this is related to your gender identity, it has nothing to do with your sex. This creates a split in the kids' minds that, oh, there's my sex, there's my body, there's my physical features, and then there's like how I identify. And because it's rooted in stereotypes, if you have a effeminate boy or a somewhat masculine, tomboy, then this ideology tells them that they have a mismatch between their gender identity and their bodies. Mismatch, this seems like something is wrong with you. But this mismatch can be fixed by modifying your body through hormones and surgeries. So this is not just a benign ideology. Teaching children that there's this fundamental split within themselves between their bodies and their minds is incredibly dangerous. And then Beth, the mom in this piece, she's also written before and had stories written about in Davis, California, where she's from, how on the campuses of a lot of these schools, there'll be these medical clinics for the kids who, once they get indoctrinated with this, they have enormous confusion about what it means, how their behavior is linked to their bodies and whether they're fundamentally mismatched as a human being. And then they get sent on to the gender clinic, which just, according to the gender affirmation model, just affirms this disconnect that they have in their head. It affirms their confusion and sets them on this pathway to potential and irreversible medical harm. So this is not merely something you can sit back and just hope goes away. This is being implemented in schools all across the United States, and especially in the blue states like California. It is completely running rampant.
Well, and I find it very sad too, because from what I get, a lot of the kids are being misled about this, and the number of kids now, because I believe of the indoctrination, it's becoming really prevalent. The number of kids who identify as some form of trans. I think it's because from what I've read, they've created genders over everything. If you're a person who you find you don't believe in sex unless you have like a deep emotional connection, like you're in love, then they call that trans. I mean, they're framing like normal, healthy relationships as trans now. And so it does seem like they're trying to make it so everybody is some form of trans because of the way they're redefining everything. But, once the kids go down this track, it's not reversible. One of the saddest things I read was there was a woman who was asked by all these young girls who had like double mastectomies, will my breasts grow back? When will they grow back? And I guess some of them are led to believe that it's reversible. But I mean, is any of this reversible?
No. I mean, maybe to some degree a social transition, just changing your pronouns and names and the way you dress is, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this is a psychosocial intervention, that if you're just going along with some kid's confusion or delusion about what they are, if they're identifying as the sex that they're not, this has enormous social costs to it. You have a sunk cost fallacy where they're going along with it. Everyone around them has been told to call them by this new name and treat them as they're the opposite sex. And the kids who are socially transitioned are much less likely to detransition in the future because this has sort of been ingrained at them from such a very young age, that the stereotype that you behave most closely to defines whether you're a boy or a girl, rather than being a boy or a girl influences the behaviors that you exhibit. What you said about kids asking, will my breasts grow back? I mean, this just shows the mental immaturity that a lot of these kids have. I mean, the kids who are getting double mastectomies, some of as young as 13 years old, who are getting these procedures. Some of them, when they're going into their surgeries, they're bringing their teddy bears with them because they're scared. It is a medical scandal. Kids cannot be making these life-changing decisions at such an early age that both has procedures that are basically turning fully functional bits of their anatomy into non-functional parts. Again, no other bit of medicine operates anywhere close to this.
Well, one question I wanted to ask you too is about the hormones they're giving kids in a lot of cases, because we've seen a trend where it seems like a lot of the mass shooters lately are trans, and this it seems to be a very common phenomenon these days. A lot of them are trans. Previously, a lot of them were on like antipsychotics and so on. And there are a lot of people, myself included, who wonder whether the drugs themselves are causing a type of like psychopathy, if they're driving people insane. I know that during the 80s and the action movies and Arnold Schwarzenegger, people talked about steroids a lot, and one of the reasons why they became controversial is because of roid rage. People were experiencing like rage. Do the types of drugs they're giving the kids also have these types of effects? Like, how are they different from the steroids of the 80s?
Yeah, well, definitely taking testosterone does influence your mood. Well, so does estrogen. Estrogen is probably less likely to make you aggressive and, shoot up a school or something like that. But testosterone does make you more aggressive. But it's important to also stress that, it's probably not just the fact that they're taking testosterone, but these trans identities, these aren't like the proximate cause of these school shootings or anything like that, at least I would suggest, because something that has come forward in all the research about the kids who are identifying as trans is they usually have a slew of pre-existing mental health conditions. Trans isn't really something that's, the trans identity itself isn't causing them this mental anguish and having these mental troubles. These precede the trans identity. And often the trans identities are predicted based on how many co-occurring comorbidities that these individuals have. So I think you can just look purely at the mental health issues absent the trans identity, and that would probably explain a lot of the types of shootings we had. These are mentally unwell people who happen to migrate towards trans identities because that's sort of in vogue at the moment.
Well, it makes me think, in the past, if you had an individual who was delusional, schizophrenic, and they showed up at a shrink and said, hey, doctor, I'm hearing voices in my head. The doctor might tell them those voices are in your imagination and they're not real. These days, it's like you show up and they're like, oh, yes, I affirm the voices in your head.
Exactly.
It's like, it seems like they're affirming mental illness to an extent. Not only that, but even trying to force society itself to all join in on the mental illness. They're trying to make everybody forced, in some cases, acknowledge what is, a self-delusion of some kind. And, I'm actually wondering what the effects on society are going to be if we continue like this.
Yeah, I mean, part of the affirmation process is, trying to get the community to affirm these specific delusions. One aspect on society that this harms, I mean, there's obvious ones like having males access female spaces, bathrooms, changing rooms, sports, but also just sort of this idea that if you're a little girl or something, that you should suppress your instinct of fear when there is an adult male that is in a private space that you're in, and suppressing these instincts, I think, can lead to tremendous harm, because these instincts are evolved for a certain reason. Because if you're in the presence of an adult male, that could be there could be very negative outcomes that result from that. You should feel unsafe in certain contexts, and by suppressing these natural instincts to get yourself out of that situation, I think is something, a major disservice and a troubling trend that we're seeing in our younger generations right now.
Yeah, well, I guess just last question. I know you're an evolutionary biologist, and you were talking a bit about the effects this will have on humanity. What is going to happen to us, just, I guess, based on maybe your theories, if we actually do destroy the definition of gender itself?
Well, regardless of how you define it or how much you try to suggest that sex isn't real, it is real, because reality is not predicated on whether or not we believe it's real or not. So it's going to snap back. I mean, it's there no matter what. You can define it any way you want. You can close your eyes. You can try to ignore it. The fundamental reality is that males and females are real biological categories, and that there's only two of them. So the more we drift away from this fundamental reality, the more it will strain society at the seams. The more we'll see just patently absurd things like, swimmers like Leah Thomas, who are biologically males, competing in female sports and becoming the NCAA Division I women's swimming champion. We'll see this in the Olympics. It'll be just truly like an idiocracy world where nothing makes sense, because we've drifted so far away from just fundamental facts of basic biology. So evolutionary, it's not going to affect anything. It's such a short-term effect. This is just a cultural sort of phase we're going through. And, I'm mainly concerned of just how far we drift away from it, because it will snap back, because reality cannot just be denied forever. The swing back could be pretty devastating for a lot of people. So I'm just trying to sort of mitigate the backswing on all of this stuff and try to just make sure people understand what basic biology is, so we can sort of mitigate the potential harms in the future.
Important stuff. Colin Wright, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.